Carol, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, professionally, I've been an educator I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, an administrator for 21 years, all at the elementary level. It was a good life. And I always thought in retirement, I would teach literacy, teach people how to read. And after a little thought about that, I decided teaching them how to speak English would be the first start. So that's what drew me here to Volunteer English Program.
Oh, that's exciting. How did you find out about the Volunteer English Program?
I have a very good friend who is a board member, and he would often discuss his student. And at the time, I was involved in a Rotary Club, so I had my friend Fred bring Gatavo to speak. And I was so impressed at their relationship, their ease and comfort with each other, and how appreciative Gatavo was for what Fred had done for him.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. How long have you been a tutor?
I think about 4 years. When I first retired, I was very heavily involved in another commitment, nonprofit, and then I took the training class and became involved with my first student.
Okay, great. Now, have you had more than one student?
I've had two students, really very diverse. My first student was a young lady from South Korea whose husband was here on a job assignment. He was at a very professional level, but absent a lot in his work. And she was well educated and eager to improve her speaking. She would be very embarrassed when people didn't understand exactly what she was trying to say in McDonald's. My second, then she unexpectedly was called back to South Korea. So my second assignment was a 55-year-old lady from Peru who had been here many years, had two teenage daughters, but was trying to reestablish herself for a better job, and she felt like her speaking and her writing were a detriment, and she wanted to improve them.
Okay, great. What has your tutoring experience meant to you?
Well, I think the surprise element for me was I realized how blessed I am in my life. When I examine the obstacles and challenges that people experience when they come to the United States, marginally speaking English or perhaps not speaking English, I think I probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed every day and face what they face. They have such courage and such appreciation for our country, but I realize how blessed I am, and I really want to give back more to them.
That's terrific. Have you ever been to a non-English speaking country yourself?
My husband and I have had the good fortune to travel a lot in retirement, and the embarrassing part of that is when we go to other countries, we expect people to speak English, and surprisingly, they do, at least in the general tourist line of visiting other countries. So I always say if someone put me in the middle of Peru right now, I would flounder. I would be desperate.
I've been to countries where I did not speak the language, and it is very uncomfortable and unsettling. And if you don't understand the culture, that's even more challenging. Do you work with your students on helping them understand the American culture as well?
My first student, more so, she was eager to know. My second student had been here a good while, but what I observed is she really existed in two cultures or climates simultaneously. She talks about her Latina friends, and then when she's in the work environment, it's different. For instance, her mother is here. Her mother does not speak English. One of her daughters doesn't speak Spanish, or so it's just an interesting way they balance their lives.
A little bit in between two worlds,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like. What's the most rewarding about tutoring an adult English learner?
Well, it's all rewarding. I think For me, the most rewarding aspect was, as a very connected and educated adult, having to use all of my skill sets to help in personal dilemmas. And as knowledgeable as I am in community service, in agencies that support at-risk personnel, even with my intervention, I saw how difficult it was for my second student to survive. So to the extent that I was able to do that for her, I found that very rewarding.
To help her navigate the systems within the United States.
Right, and I guess very often I would come in at the second step or the third step where maybe errors had been made at step one and step two, so often we found ourselves having to undo what had been done prior. And then obviously to provide the ability to help her communicate in those settings.
So it sounds like you've been more than just a tutor to her.
Well, you become a friend. In this case, I think I became the reliable family member, if you will. And fortunately, I was at a point in my life where I could do that.
Okay, great, great. If someone were to ask you, what is VEP and what is its mission, what would you say?
My perception of VEP is that it's a very highly unique organization in that it matches one-on-one help, as opposed to a classroom situation where you're certainly giving a very reasonable and well thought out curriculum. In this case, you're giving best practice, but one-on-one. So you're giving that student expressly what he or she needs in that setting.
Individualized, one-on-one, customized.
Correct.
And with your education background, I'm sure that that came in handy while you were working with your students.
I would say probably, but I would also say that you don't have to be a teacher to be an effective tutor.
That's a good piece of information to have, because it could be a little overwhelming to someone without a teaching background.
They have an excellent instructional program as you go in. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go through it a second time starting this week for just, I wanted to see the changes that they've made. So I would call it best practice.
So the volunteer English program trains you to be an effective tutor.
Correct.
Well, that's great.
And they also do their evaluations, so they give you materials that are at the proper level for your student. So you're not coming in at a first grade level when in fact they're in junior high in terms of their understanding.
So they conduct some assessments.
Correct.
And give you some guidance in terms of their current English speaking level.
Yes.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out as a tutor?
Talk 20% of the time, listen 80% of the time. Let them do the talking.
And is that for them to practice their English speaking skills?
Correct.
Okay, well, that's good advice. Can you share an anecdote or a personal story about an experience you've shared with a student or a group of students?
Yes. Despite the fact that Ava had lived in the country for many years, approximately 20 years, she had not attained citizenship. And I could tell that she was insecure about that process. So we practiced so well, and she knew everything absolutely perfectly. There again, there were some hitches in the paperwork, but when we went down for her ceremony, it was a very poignant moment for both of us. For me to sit in that room and look around at people in cultural attire from all around the world, people who were so excited you could tell they were in brand new clothes and they still had the price tag on it. It was just a very happy, proud moment. And the outshoot of that was Ava was able to, that day we went and applied for her passport, and subsequently she has been able to leave the country and visit family, which she had not been able to do before because her birth certificate spelling and her visa spelling didn't match, which seems like a little thing, but it wasn't. So now that she's a citizen and has her own passport, she can go and come back.
That's quite an accomplishment, and you helped her achieve that. I imagine it was quite an emotional experience.
It was a big celebration day, it really was.
Let's talk a little bit about the process you went through once you found out from your friend Fred about this opportunity and you wanted to become a tutor. Can you tell me about kind of the process to get that set up?
Well, Fred is tenacious, and he kept reminding me of my interest. So he advised me, he said, there's a training coming up. Would it work for you? And I understand now they have multiple trainings across the year, which is really a good thing. So I attended the training, and I thought, this is great. This is really something I do want to do. So then, being a Chester County-based organization, they do several things. One, they try and match you up with someone who lives close to you geographically. So for me, that meant both of my students were within 2 miles of my home. Then we met at the Volunteer English office, and we set up a beginning schedule. We both received our materials, and we were off and running. And we would meet oftentimes at a Barnes & Noble, at Wendy's, at Panera, just whatever was most convenient for the two of us on any given day.
Do you report out on how often you see your student? Are there requirements about how often you meet with your students?
They suggest at least twice a week, and if that works, fabulous. Some people might have more time than that. Some people might, it might be once this week, twice next week. They ask that it's a very easy process. You go online. I have an account, and I tell them how many hours I've met with student X, Y, or Z, and they maintain that just as an organization to see how many volunteer hours are generated through VEP.
Okay, great. Let me check my interview questions here.
Sure.
As you may know, the Volunteer English Program relies on the generosity of individual donors, foundations, and grants to run the organization. If you were asked to speak before a group of people who were considering making a donation to the Volunteer English Program, what would you tell them that would help make the decision to provide financial support an easy one?
Well, in another part of my life, I do help write grants for a nonprofit. And one of the things they always tell you is, in your story, tell us how your clients or your individuals benefit as opposed to the organization. This is like giving these individuals access to a better livelihood, a more productive interaction within your community, the ability to support your family often in a better state because you may advance more through your work. And also just the satisfaction of knowing that you can walk into McDonald's and not have someone ask you 5 times what it is that you want when you think that you're really saying it the way it's supposed to be said.
Something as simple as ordering at McDonald's food, having difficulty, and then you think about the complex roles that people need to navigate and the systems that they need to navigate in the United States.
So Volunteer English Program empowers the tutor to give the student a safe place to ask the question and say, this is what I said, Carol. Am I saying it right?
That's amazing. Thank you for your volunteer service.
My pleasure.